Okay. Thank you for being here. You've heard enough organ music, so we're going to dispense with the recital and get right to lunch. No, this actually worked out by total divine intervention because I only have about 30 to 35 minutes worth of music. So I think actually the fact that the service ran a little long is just perfect. But I did want to speak a little bit today about what you're hearing, and if you want to take this opportunity to go upstairs and listen from upstairs, that is completely fine. You do not need to sit there. Organ recitals are always strange, especially when the instrument's in the back, because there's nothing to see. You sort of just sit there and say, well, you know, let it wash over you if you can do that. And I say, close your eyes and just let the music do its thing. But if you want to sit upstairs, you're more than welcome to. Again, it's a fairly brief program today, and I hope it's a little fun. But a little bit about the organ. So it's really quite a credit to this congregation that you have kept this instrument going for 100 years. And I did a little basic math, and per my estimation of what this congregation paid for the organ in 1925, you spent $14.70 per year keeping it going. Now I know there's been other expenses, and I know the tunings, and you know, actually we just had a new blower installed this past week because the old blower that creates the wind that pushes through the pipes sounded like it was going to make an exit out the sidewall of the church. Bearings are out and so forth. So new blowers installed, and we're in great shape. But this instrument was built by the Hinners Organ Company of Macon, Illinois. And Mr. Hinners was quite an entrepreneur. He was quite a musician. He started building reed organs, or what we call pump organs, like maybe some of you had in your homes growing up, and they never did work right, and you'd always kill yourself company. You know, they would always run out of wind. But he also dabbled in pipe organ building, and he did a really cool thing. He was a great builder, and there are 3 instruments of essentially the same exact, almost age and disposition right here in our area. Some of you may know Zion Gordonville. Just over the hill, their Hinners is a little older than this one, but exactly the same in every other way. Likewise, St. John's Lutheran in Pocahontas, the lower church, if you will, has a Hinners as well that is essentially the same vintage as this instrument. Exactly the same sounds to choose from, play exactly the same way. And so here's the cool thing about what Mr. Hinners did. His company was started in 1897. And he really wanted to cater to the small Midwestern church that wanted a pipe organ. And maybe didn't have a lot of funds, didn't have a lot of means in which to acquire a pipe organ. Pipe organs tend to be handcrafted, right? They are built by hand from scratch, from the beginning to the end. It's usually a pretty expensive process. And there's just a lot that goes into building a pipe organ. However, Mr. Hinners said, well, we're going to basically pull a Sears catalog approach to this, and I'm going to put out a catalog with the various instruments that I build and sell, and send them out. And if a church wants to acquire an organ, then it's really pretty easy. And so it became as easy as saying, write in to the Hinners Company, give them the dimensions of the room, so the width, the diameter, the height of the ceilings. You know, you couldn't send pictures. That was not a big thing in 1925. But send all the schematics about the building, and whether or not you can come to the train depot and pick up the organ. With your own wagons and carts and so forth, because if you can, that'll save you some money. So again, the church here, for the records I read upstairs actually, the church paid $1,470 for this instrument in 1925. I don't know whether they went to pick it up on their own wagons or not, so there might have been another savings there. But that's kind of what Mr. Hinners did, and they were considered the cornfield model because they were almost indestructible. Before the days of air conditioning, with church windows being open and the dust and the pollen and everything else, didn't faze them a bit. Most pipe organs have reed sounds, things like trumpets and things like that. He said, no, we're going to dispense with all that because dirt doesn't like those kinds of pipes. So we're going to dispense with that. We're going to build you a basic instrument that has 4 sounds. It has a flute sound, it has a string sound, it has another flute sound an octave higher, and then it has what is considered a diapason or a principal sound, basically your pipe organ sound, right? And that's the big loud sound. And you can play it at 8 foot, you can play it up the octave, and that's where all the power comes from. When you take that one stop away, everything becomes very soft. And so, anyway, that's the organ that's here. It's a cornfield model. And it's 100 years old, and it's just chugging right along. I dare you to find anything else these days that has that sort of health and longevity. The program today, again, is sort of just stuff that I wanted to play, and hopefully will showcase a variety of things that the organ can do. Pastor Petra mentioned that the organ can be hand pumped, and the hand pump is still inside the case if anybody wants to. It doesn't work all that well, but if you have a really energetic arm, you can do it. But anyway, the first piece is Gordon Young's Prelude in Classic Style. That's just kind of a fun, festive piece. And then we're going to go through singing a hymn on Glory Be to God on High. I'll introduce it, we'll sing verse 1, and then I'll play a little setting. And then I'll set you up for verse 2, and I'll play a little setting, verse 3, etc., etc. But again, don't think this is long. We'll get to the lunch. I'm sure it's great. And by the time you're done, you'll be ready to eat. So I'll make a few more comments along the way, probably just over the rail. But anyway, let's go. And thank you for having me today. Thank you for
Thank you.
Some of you may have heard of the Bach 8 Little Preludes and Fugues. We don't know that they were actually written by Bach. They think one of his students wrote them, but certainly under his direction. This is the little F major. These kinds of pieces work extremely well on this instrument because they just do. I don't know what else to say. The next set of pieces, I took a little liberty because they're a little unusual. So the organ in the days of entertainment, before cell phones and everything at the tip of our fingertips, people were much more happy entertaining themselves and getting things like the Reader's Digest book of music each month, and maybe not being, perfectly trained musicians, but certainly being able to play to entertain the family and entertain themselves at home in the evenings before radio and television and all those things took over. And these pieces come from that era, approximately 100 years ago. The Over the Waves Waltz is, if you know it, you know it. If you don't, you'll know it shortly. The second piece, Sweet and Low, is extremely insignificant, and yet extremely beautiful. And the thing that I want to showcase on that piece is that what you see as far as the pipes here, only about 19 of these pipes actually sound. Everything else in the organ is back behind, and most of the pipes that remain are in a box. And the box has a set of louvers or shutters on the front of it that I can open and close via a foot pedal. And so that sweet and low, you'll hear me opening and closing that box to give dynamics, to give loudness and softness to those pieces. And all I'm doing is opening and closing a set of shades. And then the third piece is the March from Aida of Giuseppe Verdi, and I'm sure that that's probably a first for Emmanuel Tilson. anybody know who Paul Mons was? Very famous Lutheran church musician from Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Minnesota. And Pastor Bush and I were having a conversation about Paul Mons the other day, and he said, I'm surprised to see some Paul Mons on the program, because if you know Paul Mons and you know his music, you have to have about 4 keyboards and about 80 ranks of pipes to be able to play most of his music well. However, there are a set of pieces that I think work just wonderfully on the cornfield model. And all you need is 2 or 3 ranks, and they work just fine. So these are 4 of those pieces that I think you can easily get away with on a much, much smaller instrument, and shows just how versatile this Hinners is. thank you all for coming. The last piece is the Children's March by Percy Grainger. Percy Grainger was an Irish-Scottish composer of wind band music, but you can't look at the organ without looking at the organist playing transcriptions, or pieces that were written for other instruments and brought to the organ. Why, you ask? There's plenty of organ music to go around. However, the organ can do just about anything. It is literally the orchestra under, I guess, one set of hands. So this children's march was written for basically a marching band kind of setup, and it's a great way to close. Pastor Betcher, any comments for lunch, etc.?
We'll do that afterwards.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you so much. Thanks to Emmanuel for caring for this instrument, and there's no question it won't be around another 100 years from now, but I will not be replaced.